Hi everybody, my name is Jeff Strauss, and in this multi-part series, I'm going to be talking about teams. Over the last several weeks, I have pored over decades of research, combed through dozens of books, and compiled what I think is the most important information for a leader and those individuals on teams to know to run teams effectively, be a part of an effective team, and maintain and build the high performance of the teams that they're on, and how that high performance can impact others in the organization. I hope you enjoy this multi-part series. Thanks so much for tuning in. In the first part of this series, we're going to be discussing what a team is, how to build and assess a team for performance and efficacy, and we're going to discuss the team life cycle. In the second part of this series, we're going to discuss in depth why teams don't work and why teams do work, and we're going to talk a little bit about the emotional intelligence of groups. In the final part of the series, we're going to be discussing overcoming blockers and the key concepts to keep in mind as we recap all of the concepts in this series that you will need to move forward managing, leading, and participating in some of the highest performance teams of your career. So what is a team? A team is more than just a group of people who are in the same unit at work or have the same job profile. And though there are many different definitions of team, we'll use the following comprehensive example for the purposes of this series. A team is two or more individuals who exist to perform organizationally relevant tasks, share one or more common goals, interact socially, exhibit task interdependencies, maintain and manage boundaries, and are embedded in an organizational context that sets boundaries, constrains the team, and influences exchanges with other units in the broader entity. Essentially, a team is two or more people who interact and coordinate to accomplish a shared objective. Many of us take working with or on a team for granted in today's workplace. Nevertheless, it's important to understand what benefits teams bring to an organization so we can understand, one, how those of us as members of teams deliver valuable outcomes, and two, what outcomes you might derive if you're considering forming a team for a specific purpose. Teams help companies be more competitive in their markets and remain alluring to talent. A team-based approach can produce superior results over a non-team-based approach, like improved quality, overall performance, and even shareholder value. And the research on teams indicates that teams are shown to have an emotional benefit on their members, like feelings of empowerment and improved abilities to cope with stress. Let's go a little further and differentiate teams from working groups. So I won't go through this entire table, but suffice it to say that a team isn't just any group that's working together. There are many things to consider when determining whether a team or a working group is the right choice to achieve an outcome, some of which are listed in this table. The key judgment here is whether the sum of the individual bests will suffice for the challenge at hand, which would call for a working group, or whether the group must deliver substantial incremental performance requiring real joint work products, which would require a team. Working groups present fewer risks because they need little time to shape their purpose since the leader usually establishes it. Meetings run against well-prioritized agendas, and decisions are implemented through specific individual assignments and accountabilities. In a working group, performance aspirations can be met through individuals doing their respective jobs well. However, the extra level of performance teams can achieve should not be overlooked. We're going to dive much deeper into these performance benefits right now. So let's briefly discuss different types of teams. Teams generally come in three forms. Functional teams are made up of supervisor and subordinates in a formal chain of command. Functional teams usually make up a single department in an organization. Cross-functional teams are made up of individuals from different functional departments who are usually in the same hierarchical level in an organization. Cross-functional teams facilitate information sharing across functional boundaries and may often be involved in problem solving or process improvements for proven activities. Unlike a functional team, in a cross-functional team, the supervisor of the team, or the manager, director, leader, is the team leader. Cross-functional teams are formed when many inputs are needed to complete work. And finally, self-directed teams usually consist of several individuals, and this could be up to a couple dozen, who rotate roles to produce an entire product or service. These teams, like the others, can be long-term or permanent in nature and usually include three elements. Members have overlapping skills and functions which eliminate barriers among departments. Members have access to resources such as information, financial resources, equipment, machinery, or supplies needed to perform work. And members have decision-making authority to solve problems, spend money, monitor results, and plan for the future. Some or all of these elements can apply to other types of teams, of course. A common example of a self-directed team are those formed for projects using the Agile methodology, for example. And now that we know some of the characteristics of teams, how they're different than working groups, and the different types of teams, we know when a team is needed for work. So let's talk about the life cycle of a team. So most teams can be classified in one of three ways: teams that recommend things, teams that make or do things, and teams that run things. And each type faces a characteristic set of challenges. Teams that recommend things include task forces, project groups, or audit, QA, quality assurance, or safety groups. These teams almost always have predetermined completion dates. For example, a team that recommends things could be an external auditor that provides recommendations for achieving a particular standard. These teams also generally include handoffs or transfers of responsibility after their job is complete. To continue the example of an auditor, after the audit is complete and recommendations are provided, it becomes the responsibility of the auditee to implement the auditor's recommendations. Leaders of these types of teams need to devote time and attention to ensuring that handoffs or transfers of responsibility happen properly and that all stakeholders are involved early and often, as they may be required to assume responsibility for something after a handoff. Teams that make or do things include people at or near the front lines, and they're responsible for doing the basic manufacturing, development, operations, marketing, sales, and other value-adding activities of a business. Unlike teams that recommend things, teams that make or do things have no set completion date on team remits, like completing an audit by a certain date, for example. Instead, these teams have ongoing work. The sales cycle never stops, though individual sales obviously close and quarterly targets are aimed for. Now, teams that run things generally oversee some business, ongoing program, or significant functional activity. These teams deal with the complexities of long-term challenges, heavy demands on executive time, and deep-seated individualism of senior people, which can make performance of teams that run things challenging. These teams are generally small. An example of a team that runs things would be executive staff, and sometimes e-staff teams are more working groups than actual teams. So now that we've covered some of the characteristics of teams, how they're different than working groups, and the different type of teams, we know when a team is needed. So let's talk about how to build a high-performing, innovative team. So let's talk about building and assessing teams. A strong team is built on strong people, so the hiring process is critical. The hiring process is beyond the scope of this series, but you can find a presentation I gave on creating diverse, inclusive, and equitable interviews on my website, jeffstrauss.net, in the Bootcamp section. Suffice to say that resumes and cover letters will reveal an applicant's education and background, but may not uncover what the candidate would bring to the table in terms of thinking style, interests, experience, and interpersonal behaviors. And in that presentation, I provide some strategies you can use to tease out this information that may not necessarily be reflected in a resume. So you'll want to build a team that can navigate effectively among different and sometimes opposing organizational dynamics, like planning versus improvisation, playfulness versus professionalism, big picture thinking versus meticulous planning, or freedom versus discipline. You need to shape your team so that each individual brings a unique combination of the knowledge, skills, traits, and capabilities to adapt to those opposing organizational dynamics, or whatever opposing dynamics exist within your organization. Those are some pretty general ones. You want to find team members who excel in interpersonal dynamics. Team members who excel in interpersonal dynamics are a necessity. Team members who excel in interpersonal dynamics are a necessity. That's number 2. Skills like building consensus, giving feedback, communicating in groups, and motivating others are strong indicators of interpersonal capabilities. And diversity of thought and experience is also crucial. You'll want people with a blend of different thinking and people styles and unconscious ways of looking at and interacting with the world. Diversity of thought and perspective can protect your team from groupthink and can spark positive conflict where potential solutions are generated, explored, and altered through debate and challenging discourse. Now, the best way to assess the talents, skills, traits, and capabilities of your team is through conversation. When I interview members of teams that I've either inherited or that I'm building, I ask questions to try to tease out people's working styles, preferences, and challenges. Some of these questions include: what was your best team experience? What was your worst? What do you like most about working with a team, and what do you struggle with? How do you define a good teammate? What do you need from a team to do your best work? You'll also want to assess the technical skill set, of course, relevant to your industry, but interestingly, as we'll discuss a little bit later, technical skill set is less relevant to high-performance teams than ensuring your team is full of members with strong interpersonal skills. Of course, this doesn't mean that technical skill set is irrelevant, because that's obviously not the case. The data is very clear, spanning over the last 30 years, that interpersonal skills are actually a higher contributor to team performance and success than hard skill sets are. It's very interesting, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, we've talked about assessing teams. We've talked about the characteristics of high-performance teams. Let's talk about, when we're ready to build a team, what phases a team goes through as it's developing. So there are 4 or sometimes 5 stages of team development. These are conscious or unconscious interpersonal processes that members of a team go through, rather than the specific remits or objectives of that team. So again, these phases may not be clearly delineated every week or every month, and they're not necessarily milestones that are achieved via a work process, but these are unconscious or conscious interpersonal processes that occur as members of a team go through their life together. So let's talk about each of these 4 or 5 stages in a bit more detail. The first stage of the team life cycle is forming. In this stage, people are excited to be part of a team and eager for the work ahead. There may be feelings of anxiety as people wonder how they'll fit in or if their performance will meet expectations, but in general, there are high positive expectations of the experience. There may also be a lot of questions from team members about the work the team will perform, what broader expectations for their contributions to the bigger picture could be, or feelings of imposter syndrome as people wonder if they're the right fit for the team. At this stage, the primary objective for the team is to create clear structure, goals, direction, and roles. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about my own practice in guiding teams and how I structure the mission, vision, and values of my teams. In the forming stage, trust between team members and leaders begins to be built. A good kickoff or orientation process should be in place to ground the team in their mission and their goals, and to establish expectations about outcomes and team processes. And during this stage, the team's energy is focused on defining the team and its processes. So task accomplishment may be relatively low compared to later stages, and that should be expected, and it's okay that that happens. In my personal leadership practice, I found that the forming stage is a great time to start developing the team's mission and vision statements and the team's values. I always make these group exercises where my teams and I will discuss the behaviors, traits, skills, or competencies that add value to our work and explain why we take pride in it. We publish these values and mission statements and vision statements on whatever internal space there is for our team for transparency and trust, so that people who work with our team know why we exist as a team and how we operate, but also so that we ourselves can be guided by our own values and we can apply those to the way we work so that we can be proud of the work that we accomplish. I find that this method creates a strong bond between the team members themselves and the leadership of the team, and creates a shared sense of obligation and purpose. The second stage of a team life cycle is storming. In this stage, people may begin to discover that the team can't live up to all the early excitement and expectations, and that's okay. Impediments to progress and success may be encountered and shift focus from the team's output to feelings of frustration or anger with the team's progress or processes. This is a totally normal part of the storming stage. So if you are a leader of a team or on a team that is sort of new or very recently formed and you're feeling things like this could be part of this life cycle stage that you're in. During this stage, team members are figuring out how the team will respond to differences and handle conflict. And behavior can be contentious during the storming stage. There may be open disagreements about goals, expectations, roles, or responsibilities. There may also be open frustration expressed about constraints that slow progress, which could be directed at other members of the team or team leadership. So again, storming so far we've learned is characterized by some frustration as the team is sort of learning how to do team stuff. The team is learning how to team. It's at this point that the team and the team leadership refocuses on its goals. And I like to say to focus on what is right and not who is right. When you have these contentious conversations, remember to focus on the team goal and not who is correct in the conversation. That's more of a confrontation, but focusing on what is right is having a conversation. So there may be developmental opportunities in conflict management, group process, and task-related skills for team members at this stage, right? You may identify as a team leader or even as a member of a team that somebody else on the team could use a little bit of development in one of these areas. Recalibrating in this way can help team members move beyond frustration or confusion that they may be experiencing and focus on that professional development to help make them stronger team players. Now, one common complaint from teams at this and some other stages is lack of direction or transparency from leadership about the team's objectives or contributions to the bigger picture. As a leader, it's crucial that you communicate clearly and transparently and ensure everyone on the team is aligned with the mission and understands it as you do. If you notice performance dips, one likely cause at this stage is confusion about objectives or outcomes, and you must step in to ensure that your directives are understood by the team as you understand them yourself. So the third stage, as we start to develop the processes and the interpersonal skills on the team, is norming. In this stage, team members start to resolve the discrepancies they may feel between their individual expectations and the reality of the team's experience. Members begin to make conscious efforts to resolve problems and achieve harmony in this stage. And by now, norms and rituals should be starting to take shape, and team members will start to feel an increased sense of comfort to express themselves authentically. Team members tend to refocus on established team norms and rituals and return focus to tasks. So at this stage, teams can start to develop their own language, nicknames, and inside jokes as people become more comfortable and authentic working with one another. Team members also begin to feel an increasing acceptance of others on the team as they start to recognize the importance of diverse opinions, expressions, and viewpoints that make the team stronger and its output better. In this stage, feedback becomes richer and is welcomed, and group cohesion leads to an increased sense of psychological safety. Communication at this stage becomes more frequent and meaningful. Now, interestingly and recommendedly, I recommend the norming stage be a good place to develop your KPIs, your metrics, or other measurements of performance. These types of measurements early in a team's formation will help tell a really good story as the team moves into the next stage, because most of the time, performance improves as the team continues working ever more effectively together, and that hockey stick is a line that every exec loves to see. So the fourth and sometimes final stage is performing. In this stage, team members feel satisfaction in the team's progress, and a can-do attitude emerges as team members start to really assist one another. That sort of collective idea of success moves from the sort of more individualistic idea of success. And strengths begin to emerge in this stage. Team members are able to prevent or solve process and workflow problems and share insights into personal and group processes. Subject matter expertise begins to emerge, and as a leader, you may want to consider how to structure your team at this stage for optimum performance. For example, if one person on the team is a subject matter expert in one area and others aren't, you'll want to start regular knowledge sharing or cross-training sessions. The way I phrase this to my teams in practice is if someone wants to go on vacation and not worry in the back of their mind that something that they own or responsible for is going to have a problem while they're out, then they should start training the rest of the team on the top 3 to 5 things that the team should know. Team members at this stage also feel attached to the team as something greater than the sum of its parts, and the commitment to the team's mission begins to get very high here. Now, it's crucial that team members continue to deepen their knowledge and skill at this stage to continue improving team development. Hence, in the, just a moment ago, I talked about sort of cross-training, and the way I make that practical to my team is we all want to go on vacation. I'll never deny anybody's vacation, but if you ever want peace of mind while you're there and not worrying about something in the back of your head, help the team develop in your area. And finally, if you started measuring performance or output in the previous stage, this stage is a great time to look at progress and celebrate any wins. Now, sometimes teams are disbanded, like if they were a tiger team formed for a specific purpose, which is now complete. When teams are disbanded, they enter the final stage, which is adjourning. Just why sometimes this stage is not mentioned if you have long-term or permanent teams. But if a team is going to be disbanded for any reason, then adjourning is the 5th technical stage of the team life cycle. In this stage, it's perfectly normal for team members to feel a variety of concerns about the team's dissolution. It may be a mix of anxiety or sadness about their individual roles, responsibilities, or changes in the team dynamic or relationships. They may also feel a sense of satisfaction about their accomplishments or the relationships that they've built. And these feelings can come in waves or cycles, and morale may rise or fall through this stage. It's also normal that focus blurs or productivity drops during this stage. On my website, jeffstrauss.net, you can find a talk I gave on giving effective feedback. And in that talk, I linked to a resource guide that talks about a cognitive bias called regression to the mean, which is a phenomenon whereby an exceptionally high-performing individual or team starts to become less productive over time, eventually performing at a level consistent with others rather than as an outlier. As a leader, it's important to consider that at this stage, and possibly at the performing stage before it, regression to the mean is statistically likely. So when it comes to evaluating performance, be aware that a drop in performance does not necessarily mean poor performance. As a leader, you should help your team acknowledge the transition and the different ways people might be feeling. The team should focus on 3 tasks: completion of any deliverables and closure of any projects, reflection of the team's processes and products, specifically lessons learned and recording this knowledge, and a closing celebration that acknowledges the contribution of individual team members and accomplishments of the team as a whole and formally ends the team's existence. So, now that we recognize the different stages of the team, we'll talk about the factors that contribute to a team's success through a team's life cycle. But we're going to save that conversation for the next part in this series. So for now, thank you so much for watching part 1 of my series on teams. If you found any of this helpful or informative, please like and subscribe to my channel and to this video to get notified of all my content. I post training like this and other content regularly. You can also subscribe to my Substack at jeffstrauss.substack.com, where I release written content on management and leadership completely for free. All of these links and more content on leadership, like podcast interviews, link collections, and more, are available on my website, jeffstrauss.net. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Strauss on Leadership. It's a growing community there, so don't mind the fact that there's not a lot going on. But everything you can find on my website, jeffstrauss.net. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you for the next part of our presentation on teams.